And now for the $100 trillion Bankster climate swindle. Quick, what's the first thing you remember about the climate conference in Paris last December? The weather astrologers' absurd resolution to control the amount of temperature rise the world will experience over the next century? Politicians grandstanding on the freshly dead victims of their latest false flag to proclaim that their global warming nonsense was a powerful rebuke to their proxy terror army in Syria?
What a powerful rebuke to the terrorists it will be when the world stands as one and shows that we will not be deterred from building a better future for our children.
The predictable but no less wretch-inducing hypocrisy of the jet-set glitterati descending on Paris in their private jets and limousine fleets to dine on banquet lunches from Michelin-starred chefs before lecturing humanity on how we all have to tighten our belts for the new climate austerity? Of course that's what you remember, because that's what you were expected to remember. As long as you never peek under the hood, never lift the lid to check what's inside the COP21 documents, they're perfectly happy for the usual drivel about saving the planet to be printed in the mainstream press. They're perfectly happy for the progressive press to print the usual nonsense lamenting the fact that there isn't a strong enough global government to save us from the weather demons. They're even happy for the dissenters to debunk the flawed science and point out the hypocrisies and lambaste the silly political statements because all of these things miss the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue, for those who need it elaborated, is this. The future of $90 trillion of energy infrastructure investments, and the $1 trillion green bond market, and the multi-trillion-dollar carbon trading market, and the $391 billion and growing climate finance industry hangs in the balance. Of course it does. What else explains the convergence of interests in the organizations, structures, and mechanisms for global governance that the magical global thermostat narrative affords? It's why Enron and Goldman Sachs pioneered the emissions trading swindles that, surprise, surprise, are a complete and total fraud from top to bottom. It's why General Electric, DuPont, Johnson & Johnson, Pepsi, Siemens, AIG, and a host of other Fortune 500 CFR companies joined BP, ConocoPhillips, GM, and a host of other oligarch companies as founding members of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, whose blueprint for legislative action became the backbone of the Wall Street-backed Waxman-Markey Bill of 2009. It's why the Rockefellers and Rothschilds are at the forefront of the climate hysteria. It's why over 400 global institutional investors worth over $25 trillion have decided to cash in on the bonanza with their investment platform for climate actions. Heck, it's why EDF, Engie, Air France, Renault, BNP Paribas, and a host of other oligarch companies footed 20% of the bill for the Paris conference itself. And why the French government bent over backwards to point out their green credentials. Take just one structural element from the climate swindle, the Green Climate Fund. Never heard of it? Hardly surprising. It's just the facility through which the UN is expected to be clearing $100 billion in climate funding per year by the end of the decade. That's right, $100 billion per year, every year. The fund was established at the 2010 edition of the UN Climate Conference in Mexico in order to support concrete mitigation actions by developing countries that are implemented in a transparent way, which is UN newspeak for create a bottomless trough of pork for corrupt kleptocrats, bureaucrats, kakistocrats, and tyrants to siphon off before funneling some loose change into some makeover projects. And it brags that it represents a new and equitable form of global governance to respond to the global challenge of climate change, which you hardly need the globalist decoder to figure out. The fund is headquartered in the Songdo Business District of Incheon, South Korea, because the Korean Secretary General of the UN and the Korean President of the World Bank probably just threw darts at a map. Since, as we all know, blatant political nepotism never happens at those institutions. Even the fund's biggest supporters are criticizing the transparent way it is handling its first disbursement. The fund claims it consulted indigenous communities before approving $6.2 million for a Peruvian wetlands resilience program. But there is no verification that this ever took place. Worse, details of the projects it has decided to fund so far have not been publicly released. Only proposal documents, and in 2 cases, only a summary. But for those who still believe this money is being handled by angels with nothing but the best interests of humanity in mind, note this passage from the Nature article on the fund's shadiness. For some, another contentious issue is that the GCF is flowing its money mainly through international organizations, such as multilateral or private banks such as the World Bank and Deutsche Bank, rather than sending it directly to institutions in developing countries where the projects are taking place. For some, you mean people with their heads screwed on straight? Oh, and the kicker? The fund's executive director just so happens to be an ex-Citibank investment banker. Who would have thunk it? Yes, the global climate swindle is well underway. Brought to you by the same trustworthy folks in the banking industry and the Fortune 500 CFR globalist jet set who have been steering us into the happy economic, political, and environmental conditions that we enjoy today. Oh, wait. If there's any bright spot in all of this, it's that so far the fund has only managed to raise just over $10 billion in pledges from the developed countries. And even that is an inflated number, which includes the $3 billion which Obama made a big show of pledging in 2014, but so far hasn't actually delivered. I suppose we can add that to the growing list of broken promises. It's a long way to go to get to that $100 billion per year mark they're hoping to reach by 2020. Don't feel too sorry for the globalists, though. Their game is a war of attrition. And as long as people continue to buy into the narrative that all of this money is going to help the poor and downtrodden by way of the UN and the World Bank and their corporate crony Wall Street financial institutions, then it's only a matter of time before this thin edge of climate cronyism turns into the full wedge of global kleptocracy.
I thank the chairman and the ranking members for the opportunity to offer testimony today. Prior to 2009, I felt that supporting the IPCC consensus on climate change was a responsible thing to do. I bought into the argument, don't trust what one scientist says, trust what an international team of 1,000 scientists has said after years of careful deliberation. That all changed for me in November 2009 following the leaked ClimateGate emails that illustrated the sausage making and even bullying that went into building the consensus. I started speaking out, saying that scientists needed to do better at making the data and supporting information publicly available, being more transparent about how they reach conclusions, doing a better job of assessing uncertainties, and actively engaging with scientists having minority perspectives. The response of my colleagues to this is summed up by the title of a 2010 article in the Scientific American, Climate Heretic Judith Curry Turns on Her Colleagues. I came to the growing realization that I had fallen into the trap of groupthink. I had accepted the consensus based on second-order evidence, the assertion that a consensus existed. I began making an independent assessment of topics in climate science that had the most relevance to policy. And what have I concluded from this assessment? Human-caused climate change is a theory in which the basic mechanism is well understood, but whose magnitude is highly uncertain. No one questions that surface temperatures have increased overall since 1880, or that humans are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, or that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases have a warming effect on the planet. However, there is considerable uncertainty and disagreement about the most consequential issues, whether the warming has been dominated by human causes versus natural variability, how much the planet will warm in the 21st century, and whether warming is dangerous. The central issue in the scientific debate on climate change is the extent to which the recent and future warming is caused by humans versus natural climate variability. Research effort and funding has focused on understanding human causes of climate change. However, we have been misled in our quest to understand climate change by not paying sufficient attention to natural causes of climate variability, in particular from the sun and from the long-term oscillations in ocean circulations. Why do scientists disagree about climate change? The historical data is sparse and inadequate. There's disagreement about the value of different classes of evidence, notably the value of global climate models. There's disagreement about the appropriate logical framework for linking and assessing the evidence. And scientists disagree over assessments of areas of ambiguity and ignorance. How then and why have climate scientists come to a consensus about a very complex scientific problem that the scientists themselves acknowledge has substantial and fundamental uncertainties? Climate scientists have become entangled in an acrimonious political debate that has polarized the scientific community. As a result of my analyses that challenge IPCC conclusions, I have been called a denier by other climate scientists, and most recently by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. My motives have been questioned by Representative Grijalva in a recent letter sent to the president of Georgia Tech. There is enormous pressure for climate scientists to conform to the so-called consensus. This pressure comes not only from politicians, but from federal funding agencies, universities, and professional societies, and scientists themselves who are green activists. Reinforcing this consensus are strong monetary, reputational, and authority interests. In this politicized environment, advocating for carbon dioxide emissions reductions is becoming the default, expected position for climate scientists. This advocacy extends to the professional society that publish journals and organize conference. Policy advocacy, when combined with understating the uncertainties, risks destroying science's reputation for honesty and objectivity, without which scientists become regarded as merely another lobbyist group. I would like to thank the committee for raising the issue of data versus dogma in support of improving the integrity of climate science. This concludes my testimony.